For a record 6 years now, Squarespace has been helping me turn my dream into reality, and that's what Squarespace does for millions of other people too. Their industry-leading website creation tools help millions of people start new careers, build new businesses, or just get things done. They're offering a special discount to viewers of this channel, so stick around to the end of the video to learn more. South of Midnight was revealed at last year's Xbox Summer Games Showcase. Remember that one where Xbox delivered banger after banger and it felt like the glory days of E3 again? Sandwiched in there amidst Fable, Perfect Dark, and Doom Dark Ages, it would have been easy for South of Midnight to have gotten lost in the shuffle, but it's a testament to the incredible presentation, art design, music, and characterization that this still managed to stand out. Of course, we shouldn't be too surprised that this one looked as good as it did, because it is, after all, from Compulsion Games. This is the studio behind Contrast and We Happy Few. Compulsion clearly have a knack for combining stark imagery and evocative narratives, which made a lot of sense given that it was founded by one Guillaume Provost, who had earlier spent a chunk of his career at Arcane. Microsoft acquired Compulsion back in 2018 and they immediately began work on South of Midnight. Some 6 years later, we'd get a really good look at it at the most recent Xbox Developer Direct, and I'm not gonna lie, I was low-key blown away by what they showed off. The initial reveal trailer didn't give away too much, but this deep dive showcased some truly inspired art design, and the Deep South setting was super appealing because way too few games choose to set themselves there. The gameplay showcase didn't look amazing since it seemed like fairly standard third-person action-adventure platformy stuff, but the visuals, the cast of characters, the music, the narrative themes being teased, all that stuff really rung my bell. So when Microsoft invited me to go hands-on with the game, I was very pumped, and I don't want to be coy, this did not disappoint, though it did sharpen my view that this one is very much about the vibes and less about the gameplay, but I'll explain all of that as we go. Just so you know the conditions for the preview, I played around 2 hours of it on an Xbox Series S console, and the footage that you're seeing here is my own gameplay. This is an in-progress build, and you can definitely tell because I certainly noticed a few technical issues, namely some frame rate drops and plenty of screen tearing, but Compulsion have said they're targeting 60 FPS for this, with the Series X aiming at 4K and the Series S shooting for 1080p. The section I played through was actually chapter 3 of the game, so I missed how the main character Hazel got herself into this mess. There were no capture restrictions, so I can show you everything I experienced. The game is arriving on April 8th for Xbox consoles and PC, and it will of course be day one on Game Pass. So, high level take, I went into this one seeking vibes, and that is exactly what I got. There's a cinematic that plays at the start that really sets the visual tone for the game. Here, just take a look. So while the rest of South of Midnight doesn't look quite like this, the opening cinematic certainly sets the scene. This puppet-like, stop-motion, animated, animatronics thing immediately tells you that this is going to be a very visually led game. There's something arresting and unsettling about these images. It's not horror, but it's abstract enough that it flirts at the edges of horror, like Jim Henson's Dark Crystal or something, but obviously set in the Deep South. And that was the part that really got me on the hook here. I don't exactly know why, but I'm just really fascinated by stories set in the Deep South. There's a mythology around that region which, again, flirts at the edges of horror. Urban legends and the bayou and voodoo. There's a reason that stuff like True Detective and Resident Evil 7 and yes, Hunt Showdown all chose this as a setting. In popular imagining, it's a world that we can look at but can't truly see, that we can stand in without truly being there. We're always on this side of the looking glass until some book or film or TV show lets us pass through to the other side. That appears to be Hazel's journey here in South of Midnight. Like I said, I didn't get to play the opening chapters, so I don't quite know how she got here, but she's clearly stepped into a world that she's never seen before and she's just trying to make sense of it. She has newly discovered powers in the form of her weaving. She's talking to a giant catfish who's suspended in the grip of a large tree that also seems to be a person somehow. She's exploring a swampy village where everyone seems to have been evicted for reasons unknown, and she's fighting malevolent shadows that move between realities. In Chapter 3, Hazel is still figuring all of this out, and it was cool to watch her grapple with all of that. I was super into her dialogue, her delivery, her overall character. Yeah, she was a fish out of water, no pun intended, but she wasn't doing what Austin Walker referred to as like the smirking protagonist thing, someone cringing at what was going on around her in the hope that she might placate a more cynical audience. No, Hazel is as skeptical and weirded out as she needs to be in order to make her seem real, but she also rolls with the punches, which invites us to do the same.
Would you kindly do your weavy thing and help me down?
What weavy thing?
Unquestionably, it was the characterization and narrative of this whole sequence that won me over more than anything else. Hazel is cool, the giant magic talking catfish thing sounds like Gambit and I'm super into that. At one point you meet a crazy hillbilly dude who manages to leave his mark in just a few lines of dialogue. Everyone and everything you meet feels like a lot of love has been poured into it. Same goes for the overall story, which I suspect will be the fulcrum for this whole experience. So the truth is, I played this for 2 hours and the first 90 minutes I was like, okay, this is nice, but it wasn't really grabbing me. Then something happened in the story and I was like, whoa, okay, Jesus. It was very dark in a kind of gothic fairy tale sense, but also profoundly sad and very affecting. After that point, that event sets up a huge climactic set piece that involves a new explorable area, a chase sequence, and a musical number that recounts the events of the chapter in a melancholic southern dirge. So at this point, I was fully locked in, and when the preview build wrapped, I was like, okay, I get what this is now. To me, this is very much like Psychonauts, a third-person action platformer that uses each of its levels to tell a story. The gameplay is kind of incidental to the whole affair, but the game uses visual presentation, settings, characters, narrative, and music to tell these interactive storylines. And if the rest of the game's stories are as compelling as this one, then that's going to make for a great experience, I think. But yeah, like Psychonauts, the gameplay is not the focus here, I don't think. So this is a third-person action platformer. When you're not watching cutscenes, you'll spend most of your time running around fairly linear environments, just jumping on stuff. It's very forgiving in its platforming. Some of the stuff you're jumping on can look a little narrow, but when you land near the edges of it, you feel that there's plenty of invisible geometry kicking in to stop you from falling. So it's a platformer, but it's not one that's looking to ask much of you mechanically. At least it wasn't in this part of the demo. I don't know if it gets much harder later on. In terms of spicing up that platforming, there isn't too much that goes into it. A press of the left bumper allows you to solidify objects so you can jump on them. You can double jump. At one point, you unlock the ability to glide a short distance. Toward the end of the preview, I got the ability to wall run. Again, nothing we haven't seen before, and the implementation of all this stuff is pretty workmanlike, but it's very competent, and at no point did I feel like I was fighting the controls or the mechanics, or that the game was trying to needlessly make things more difficult. Rather than be a focus of the game, it's clear that Compulsion are using this platforming as a pacing mechanism in between the cutscenes and the combat arenas. So the combat side of South of Midnight was actually quite surprising. This is a game centered on its story, with very relaxed, low-stakes platforming, and then you enter a combat arena and the intensity suddenly spikes to like 15 out of 10. It's quite jarring. The way it works is that you won't find any enemies walking around the world. Instead, you'll enter these clearly designated combat arenas, and when you do, the enemies will spawn in waves. They're no joke. They each have a variety of moves that force you to stay on your toes, dodging regularly to avoid their attacks. The more mobile enemies are particularly ferocious, moving in really fast and aiming to surround you as much as possible. Everything deals lots of damage and takes a fair amount of time to drop. It's not easy. It's not super hard. Like, don't get me wrong, this isn't Ninja Gaiden or anything, but it's tricky enough that I died a few times and I had plenty of other close calls. It's a difficulty spike that doesn't feel fully aligned to the rest of the overall experience, but I do think that it helps the game's pacing, since it does provide a big shot of adrenaline in an experience that is often just coasting along at 60 BPM. I will say though that the suite of abilities at your disposal don't really feel fit for purpose at this point. Like, there's one that can kind of stun enemies, another one that pulls them towards you, and another that kind of knocks them or projectiles away. Given that all you can really rely on to deal damage is a basic attack, it does feel like these abilities should have had more damage utility, so I don't know if that comes later on, but for now, it does feel like your kit is missing something essential that would really tie combat together. So at this point I've said that the levels are linear, the platforming is simple, and the combat doesn't quite hang together yet, so why am I walking away from South of Midnight feeling pretty jazzed about it and excited to play more? Well, it's for the simple reason that we come to different games for different things. Again, coming back to that Psychonauts comparison, everything that I just said about South of Midnight could also have been said about Psychonauts, and Psychonauts fucking rules. It's incredible. Like, hands down one of the best Xbox games and criminally overlooked. A good game isn't always good because it does everything well. Sometimes it can be good because it just does one thing really well. And so far, I'm all in on South of Midnight's world, characters, music, and storytelling. It's sort of creepy looking, but also beautiful, and it's sad, but also hopeful, and it's fantastical while also feeling like it has its feet firmly on the ground. For me, South of Midnight looks like the perfect kind of game for Game Pass, and that's a phrase that gets bandied about in a very derogatory sense, like it implies that the game is not good enough to justify a box price and could only live on a subscription service. And look, sometimes that's true, sure, but in the case of games like South of Midnight, I think the term means something else. The fact is, people's purchasing habits have changed, and they're less likely to take a chance on new IP, particularly one like this, which is more artistic, less conventional. In these instances, Game Pass is a godsend because it lets developers reach a far wider audience than they otherwise might have been able to. Based on my 2 hours with the game, South of Midnight doesn't strike me as the kind of game that's going to sell 5 million units, but it does strike me as the sort of game that people boot up on a whim when they're browsing Game Pass and they find themselves suddenly and unexpectedly spirited away, and maybe South of Midnight becomes one of the best games they'll play all year, and they never would have had that experience were it not for Game Pass. Too early to judge, of course, have to experience the full game when it arrives in April, but yeah, I like this, I'm really keen to play more of it, and at the very least, I expect the people who unexpectedly bump into this one are going to be pleasantly surprised by it. Anyway, that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again real soon. One question I often get is how to break into the world of content creation. There are a lot of ways to do it, of course: streaming, community building, YouTube, games media, many ways to cut your teeth. Obviously, my stuff eventually ends up on YouTube, but what if YouTube wasn't the right fit for you? What if you wanted to build your own independent gaming outlet or blog, allowing you to talk about games how you like, building a portfolio of work as you did so that you could one day leverage into different opportunities? Well, if you're just starting out, then can I suggest this video sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace lets you build professional-looking websites in minutes. You just select from their extensive list of pre-built templates, customize those templates to your desire, and boom, you're in business. If you can handle formatting a Word document or a PowerPoint slide, then you are already well and truly equipped to make a fantastic looking website through Squarespace. Once it's done and your content starts going up, Squarespace has all sorts of back-end tools to help you grow your site. Detailed analytics tools showcase what your audience is clicking on, and SEO tools and social media integration make it easier for your audience to find you. Recently, Squarespace took things to a whole new level. Their all-new design intelligence framework leverages their 2 decades of experience in website creation to give you even more tools to shape the website of your dreams, helping you with things like copywriting, tone of voice, product descriptions, and more. It's an easy-to-use end-to-end solution that could be the start of your content creation journey if the written word is something that interests you. If it is and you want to get started, then visit squarespace.com to start building your website through their free trial, and if you want to get serious, use offer code SKILLUP to get 10% off your purchase of a domain name. Thanks Squarespace for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.